I am Captain Alicia Murray, 32 years old. 3 years ago, my father looked into my pregnant sister's eyes and said 6 words that broke our family. You are not my daughter. My mother stripped the earrings from her ears and threw her out into the pouring rain. Instead of watching a 23-year-old being kicked out with nothing but a backpack and an ultrasound photo, I took my sister home that night. For 3 years afterward, I drained my military hazard pay, staying up through every bottle feeding for my nephew, while our own flesh and blood remained absolutely silent. But the counterattack they received at the boy's 3rd birthday party, when what my parents discovered about the true identity of his father was exposed, is something no one in our family will ever forget. Welcome to Noble Revenge, where the hypocritical masks are torn away. If you're new here, this channel specializes in family stories that test limits and restore your faith. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts as you listen, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any stories. Josie called me at 11:14 p.m. on Wednesday. Rain lashed the gutters outside my apartment. The vibration of the phone on my nightstand felt like a low-voltage shock. 11:14 p.m. In the military, you learn to wake up fully in 2 seconds flat. I swiped the screen without looking. There was no, "Hello, no, Alicia, help me." Just the frantic, wet sound of boots hitting asphalt and the roar of a semi-truck blaring its horn as it barreled down the I-35 overpass. Josie's breathing was a mess. Short, jagged hitches that told me her lungs were full of cold air and terror. I didn't waste breath on questions. I was off the bed, grabbing my Ford keys from the counter before the call even dropped. I kicked the door open, the humid Texas heat clashing with the torrential downpour. I drove like a woman possessed through the Dallas suburbs, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. 15 minutes later, I saw her. A small shivering shape huddled under the flickering neon of a closed gas station. I hauled her into the passenger seat. She was 23, but in the blue glow of the dashboard, she looked 10. Her lips were a pale, bruised purple. Her hands were locked around a cheap nylon backpack as if it held the last scrap of oxygen on the planet. Inside a wet Ziploc bag, clutched against her chest, I saw the grainy, black and white curl of an ultrasound photo. A life our father had just tried to erase. Back at my apartment, I didn't do the big sister hug. I didn't have time for a breakdown. I tossed her a dry towel, thick, scratchy, and smelling of the industrial detergent I used. I shoved her toward the bathroom and cranked the wall heater until it rattled, pushing out a wave of dry, dusty heat. I watched the water drip off her onto my threadbare carpet. My mind drifted back. 3 days ago. Sunday dinner. The Goodwin house in the suburbs. It always smelled the same. Heavy beef stew and that cloying chemical pine scent Deborah used to hide the rot underneath. Frank sat at the head of the table. He looked like a statue carved from Sunday school righteousness, his shirt starched so stiff it looked like it would crack if he breathed too deep. Deborah was busy with the peas, her movements precise, robotic, gapping the space between her and her children. The clink of silver against china was the only music we had. Josie set her fork down. The metal hit the rim of her plate with a sharp clack that sounded like a hammer cocking. "I'm pregnant," she said. The air left the room. Frank didn't flinch. He didn't even stop chewing for 3 seconds. Then, the legs of his heavy oak chair shrieked against the hardwood floor. He stood up, looming over her like a judge at the gates of a very cold hell. "You are not my daughter," he said. Cold. Flat. Like he was filing a report on a broken appliance, I was sitting 2 chairs down. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands stayed flat on the table. I looked at Ma. I waited for the scream. I waited for her to throw her arms around her youngest child. Deborah didn't scream. She folded her linen napkin. Square, perfect. She threw it onto the table like a white flag of surrender. But she wasn't surrendering to love. She leaned over the stew, her red manicured fingers lunging out like talons. She didn't slap Josie. She grabbed her earlobes. One hard, violent yank. Josie let out a small, choked sob as the pearl earrings, the Goodwin heirlooms, ended up in Deborah's palm. "These are for women who know the meaning of dignity," Deborah hissed. She walked to the front door, threw it wide, and pointed at the black Texas sky. "Out!" The memory snapped. I was back in my living room. I walked to the door. I threw the first deadbolt. Click. The second. Clack. The third. Thud. In Iraq, if you lost communication, you were dead. Here, silence was my best weapon. I laid a wool blanket over the sofa and set a glass of lukewarm water on the table. Josie was still shivering in the bathroom, the sound of the shower barely drowning out the rain outside. "Go to sleep," I called out, my voice raspy and hard. "They don't know the codes to this station." I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen chair, back straight, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling like enemy scouts. I was a captain. I was a protector. My parents had spent their lives building a church, but they'd forgotten how to be a sanctuary for their own blood. The sun started to bleed through the blinds at 7:15 a.m., casting long, orange stripes across the floor. My phone lit up on the counter. It didn't just ring. It pulsed. A warning light in the dark. "Mom!" The negotiation was officially starting. The sun had not even cleared the horizon when my phone started its vibration dance again. I let it rattle against the scarred wood of the kitchen table until the silence in the apartment felt heavy enough to choke. On the fourth ring, I slid my thumb across the glass. I did not say a word. I just held the phone to my ear and waited, my back straight against the hard plastic chair. "Bring her back," Deborah's voice came through, dry as a West Texas drought. There was not a flicker of warmth in that tone. No, "Is she okay?" No, "Is the baby alive?" Just a cold, hard demand wrapped in the scent of expensive perfume. "She needs to get on her knees and beg her father for forgiveness. Then, and only then, will we discuss this like civilized people." I looked over at the sofa. Josie was a ball of tangled limbs and old wool blankets, her face still pale, even in sleep. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp behind my ribs, a familiar pressure I used to feel before a patrol. "Civilized?" I whispered. The word felt like grit in my mouth. I did not wait for her response. I tapped the red icon, went into the settings, and hit block. That was it. The bridge was not just burned. I'd called in an airstrike on the ruins. My old command was officially cut off. No more orders from headquarters. I pulled my laptop over. The screen hissed to life, casting a cold blue glow over my stained coffee mug. Log in, military bank portal. There it was, blinking in the dark. $14,211. Every single cent of that money was soaked in the fine gray dust of Kabul. It was 18 months of eating sand, sleeping in bunkers with a rifle for a pillow, and jumping every time a door slammed too hard. Hazard pay. Blood money. I opened a fresh Excel sheet. My fingers moved over the keys with a rhythmic, mechanical precision that only years of filling out casualty reports can give you. Column A. Diapers, baby formula. Onesies that were not hand-me-downs from the church donation bin. Column B. Prenatal vitamins, copays. The mountain of medical bills that I knew was coming like a slow-moving storm. In the States, you do not just have a kid. You buy one, installment by installment. I stared at the numbers until they blurred into gray lines. Then I picked up the phone again and dialed the base human resources office. "This is Captain Murray," I said, my voice steady, professional, stripped of any emotion. "Put me down for every night shift you have for the next 6 months. Yeah, I know the schedule. I do not need sleep. I need the overtime pay." I closed the laptop. The sound of the lid snapping shut was the only victory I had that morning. By Saturday afternoon, the humidity was thick enough to chew. I was halfway through a cup of lukewarm tea when the doorbell let out a sharp, persistent ring. I did not have to look through the peephole to know who it was. The flying monkey had arrived on schedule. Aunt Carol stood on the welcome mat, her face twisted into a mask of practiced pity. In her hands, she clutched a white porcelain casserole dish. It was chipped at the handle, a small jagged tooth of gray against the pristine white surface. "Deborah sent this over," Carol said, already trying to wedge her shoulder past the doorframe. I did not move an inch. I stayed planted like a fence post. It is tuna casserole, your mother's special recipe. She thought you two might be hungry. She stepped inside as I moved back, her eyes darting around the living room like a pair of hungry flies. She was not looking for Josie. She was looking for evidence of sin. She scanned the floor for a pair of men's work boots, checked the kitchen trash for empty beer cans, looked for anything she could report back to the High Council at Grace Fellowship. Everyone at the church is starting to talk, Alicia, she whispered, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone people use when they are about to stab you. They are asking why Josie was not at the Wednesday night service. They are asking if she is, well, fallen. Frank is heartbroken, Fallen? I leaned against the door frame, my arms crossed over my chest. I did not offer her a seat. I did not offer her water. I just watched her. They are not worried about her soul, Carol. They are worried about the gossip columns in the local paper. Do not be like that, she huffed, shoving the dish into my hands. The porcelain was cold. Dead. We just want what is best for the family image. Think of your father's position. Thanks. You can go now. I closed the heavy wooden door before she could finish her sentence. The lock clicked into place, a solid final sound that echoed in the hallway. I walked into the kitchen and shoved the dish into the back of the fridge. It sat there for 9 days. I watched the layer of congealed fat turn into an opaque, yellowish crust. It looked like a map of everything I hated about that town. It was not food. It was a bribe, a low-cost attempt to buy Josie's silence and my compliance. On the 10th morning, I pulled it out. I did not even bother to uncover the foil. I walked to the trash can, stepped on the pedal, and watched the plastic lid swing open with a hollow thud. I flipped the dish over. The whole mass of tuna and noodles slid out in one gray, jiggly block. Squelch. I rinsed the dish and put it on the counter. In my command post, we did not survive on charity, and we did not eat the scraps of people who had left us to rot in the rain. If you have ever had a family member try to buy your loyalty with a cheap gift while they were busy stabbing you in the back, hit that like button right now. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. And do me a favor, drop a comment below with the word truth if you believe that a family's image is not worth more than a person's life. I read every single one of them. I was drying my hands on a paper towel when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Dr. Patrice. Greg is on the pulpit right now. He's using certain members of the community as an example of moral decay. You need to see this. The war was moving to the public square. Sunday morning in North Dallas felt like an oven. The asphalt on the police cruiser's lot was already shimmering with heat when my phone vibrated. I didn't have to guess who it was. Dr. Patrice had sent a video link with a single word. Watch. I leaned my head against the headrest, the air conditioning in the patrol unit humming a low mechanical tune. On the small screen, the Sanctuary of Grace Fellowship was packed. Greg Harmon was on the stage, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a performer. He gripped the microphone, his voice booming through the high-end sound system. Sin is not a secret, he barked, his eyes scanning the pews. It is a rot. It starts in the dark, and it eats the foundations of the family until everything collapses. We have those among us right now. Young women who chose the path of the flesh over the path of the Lord. They carry the evidence of their shame, and they think they can hide. But the Bible tells us that what is done in the dark will be brought to the light. The camera panned to the front row. There they were, Deborah and Frank Goodwin. They weren't just listening, they were performing too. Deborah sat with her chin tilted up, her face a mask of frozen righteousness. Frank gave a slow, measured nod. They were sitting there, basking in the public execution of their own daughter's character. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a ghostly white. I could feel the leather groaning under the pressure. These people weren't parents. They were spectators at a lynching. 32 weeks. That's how long Josie had lasted before her body started to shut down. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen, scraping the remains of a cheap takeout dinner into the trash, when I heard the sound. A heavy, wet thud against the linoleum. I found her curled in a ball, her hands clawing at her chest. Her face was the color of a gutter-washed sheet. I didn't ask her if she was okay. I didn't have time for a conversation. I grabbed her under the arms and hauled her up. She was heavy, dead weight, her breathing coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "Alicia?" she wheezed. "It hurts. My head. It's like it's going to explode." I knew the signs. I'd seen it in the field. This wasn't just a headache. I got her into the Ford, her body slumping against the door as I gunned the engine. The tires shrieked as I tore out of the apartment complex, the I-35 a blur of rain and neon. The ER at Dallas General smelled like bleach and dying hopes. The fluorescent lights overhead were a sharp, stinging white that made everything look jagged. Nurses were moving fast, yelling codes I didn't need to understand to know we were in trouble. One look at the monitor told the story. 158/98. Preeclampsia. A silent killer. A nurse shoved a clipboard into my hands. "Emergency contact?" I stared at the form for 2 seconds. My pen hovered over the lines for mother and father. I didn't think about it. I drew a thick black line through both boxes. I signed my own name under next of kin. I was the only wall between Josie and the abyss. By 9:41 p.m., the hospital was quiet except for the rhythmic, metallic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor. I was leaning against the cold, dry wall of the hallway, my back aching. I pulled out my phone and unblocked Deborah's number. I had to do it. Not for her, but for the record. "Josie is in the ER. Blood pressure is spiking. It's life or death." I hit send. I didn't look away. 2 seconds later, the word "delivered" changed to "read." My heart stayed flat. I watched the 3 little dots appear at the bottom of the screen. She was typing. She was actually going to say something. Then, the dots vanished. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The blue light of the screen faded into black. I stared at the dark glass for an hour. No call. No follow-up text. No. Which hospital? Nothing. They had made their choice. They would rather have a dead daughter than a scandal that might knock a deacon off his pedestal. I blocked her again. This time, I knew I'd never unblock her as long as I lived. At 3 a.m., the silence was shattered. A high, thin wail tore through the delivery room. It was the sound of a survivor. Micah James Goodwin was born into a world that didn't want him, but he didn't seem to care. He screamed until his lungs were clear. The doctors were busy with Josie, who was drifting in a medicated fog, her face finally losing that gray, deathly cast. I walked down to the gift shop in the lobby. The shelves were half empty, the lights dim. I found a yellow blanket, cheap, scratchy acrylic that cost $12. I swiped my card without looking at the price. I went back up and watched the nurse wrap the boy in it. "You want to hold him?" she asked, her voice tired but kind. I took the bundle. He was tiny, a few pounds of fragile skin and bone, but he felt heavy in my arms. I sat in the plastic chair under the dim yellow glow of the nightlight and looked at him. I expected to see my father's narrow eyes. I expected the Goodwin nose or Ma's thin, judgmental lips. But as the boy blinked, I froze. He had thick, ink-black curls. His jaw was already square, a heavy, defiant line of bone. He didn't look a thing like a Goodwin. He looked exactly like a man I saw every single Sunday, standing on a stage at Grace Fellowship, preaching about the sins of the flesh. He looked like a carbon copy of Greg Harmon. I gripped the edge of that yellow blanket, my breath hitching in my throat. I wasn't just holding a baby anymore. I was holding the grenade that was going to blow my parents' perfect world to hell. Micah was 14 months old. He was a solid ball of energy, constantly testing the gravity of our cramped apartment. He had started walking 3 weeks ago. Not the cute, wobbling steps you see in commercials, but a determined, heavy-footed march. He spent his mornings crashing into the sharp corners of my second-hand coffee table. I had covered the edges with thick, black industrial foam, but the apartment still felt like a minefield. That Tuesday morning, the mail arrived with a heavy, official-looking envelope from the Department of Defense. I sat at the small kitchen table, the smell of burnt coffee and baby wipes hanging in the air. I opened it with a clean, practiced motion. It was a formal offer for a promotion to major, coupled with a permanent posting at the Pentagon. The salary was triple what I was making at the local base. It was the career I'd bled for in the sand of Iraq. I looked at the paper, then I looked at Micah. He was currently sitting on the floor, chewing on a plastic block, his thick black curls matted with sweat. His crib was a mess of plastic bars and heavy-duty duct tape holding the side rail together. I looked at the letter one more time. The words, Major Alicia Murray, seemed to belong to a different person. A person who didn't have to worry about a 23-year-old sister who still woke up screaming from nightmares about her father's voice. I gripped the paper. I did not hesitate. I ripped the commission into 4 clean pieces and dropped them into the trash bin under the sink, right on top of a used diaper. I pulled on my scuffed, salt-stained boots and zipped up my worn flight jacket. I had a night shift at the base starting in an hour. This station could not be left unguarded. By Wednesday afternoon, a bitter cold wind was rattling the window frames. The sky over suburban Dallas was a dull, bruised gray. Josie was out working a double shift at the dental clinic, trying to save every nickel for Micah's future. I decided to spend my few hours of sleep deprivation-fueled energy cleaning the back bedroom. The room was a mess of folded clothes and stacked boxes. In the corner sat a cheap particle board dresser I had picked up at a garage sale. The bottom drawer had been acting up for months, sticking every time I tried to pull it out. I grabbed the cold metal handle and gave it a sharp, violent jerk. The wood let out a piercing, high-pitched screech. The drawer didn't just open, the back panel snapped, and the bottom lining buckled. I reached in to clear out the debris when I felt something rough against my fingertips. Tucked deep under the moisture-proof paper lining was a small square envelope. It was folded into quarters, the edges frayed and yellowing. I pulled it out. The paper felt heavy and coarse. I unfolded it, and the sight of the ink made my stomach do a slow, sick roll. It was blue ink, written in Josie's frantic, slanted handwriting. There were deep, puckered stains on the paper where the ink had blurred, stains from tears that had dried long ago. The first 2 words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Dear Ethan. Ethan Harmon, the golden boy of Grace Fellowship. The son Pastor Greg bragged about every Sunday. My eyes scanned the lines like a radar screen, searching for a target. I know you are in Germany, the letter read. I know your father told you not to contact me. I am 17 weeks pregnant. The baby is yours. The letter had never been mailed. For 18 months, Josie had carried this secret like a jagged piece of shrapnel in her heart. She had let our father disown her. She had let our mother strip her of her dignity. She had let the entire town call her a tramp. She had endured it all to protect Ethan's degree in Germany and his precious future. She had been the silent protector, while the man on the pulpit used her as a footstool for his own ego. That night, the air in the kitchen was thick with tension. I waited until Josie walked through the door, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. I didn't say a word. I just threw the 3 pages of blue-inked paper onto the laminate table. Josie froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost under the flickering fluorescent light. She didn't try to lie. She didn't have the strength left for it. She sat down, her hands shaking as she touched the paper. Talk, I said. My voice was a low, dangerous rumble. The truth came out in broken, jagged pieces. The day she found out she was pregnant, Pastor Greg had cornered her in the church parking lot. He didn't offer a prayer. He didn't offer help. He had intercepted Ethan's phone, deleted Josie's number, and told his son that she had been seen at the local bars with truck drivers. He had used his power to bury her alive to keep his son's overseas education and his own seat of power clean. I stood up and took the letter back. My movements were slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. I looked out the window at the dark Texas night. I could see the faint lights of the Grace Fellowship steeple in the distance. He thinks he won, I whispered. I folded the letter and tucked it into my inner jacket pocket, right over my heart. My eyes were locked onto the distance, my mind already calculating the logistics of the next phase. I wasn't just a sister anymore. I was a hunter. I had the coordinates. I had the target. Ethan is coming home, I said. Josie looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Alicia, don't. Greg will destroy us. I didn't blink. I just checked the deadbolt on the door one last time. He already tried. Now it is my turn. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only thing cutting through the thick darkness of my kitchen. It was 2 a.m. Outside, the Dallas humidity hung heavy over the empty street. I did not need sleep. I needed a target. I spent 10 minutes digging through the digital layers of the professional world until I found what I was looking for. Ethan Harmon, senior engineer, Munich, Germany. The profile picture showed a man who looked like he belonged on a corporate billboard. He had the same ink-black curls as Micah. He had that same heavy, square jawline. He was the grown version of the boy sleeping in the other room. I felt a cold, sharp itch in my chest. I opened the message box. I did not waste time with pleasantries or formal introductions. I typed one sentence. This is Alicia, Josia's sister. There is something you need to know. I hit send. The status changed to seen within an hour. Then, nothing. 3 days passed. The silence from Germany was as heavy as the silence from the Goodwin house. I watched Josie struggle through her shifts at the dental clinic. I watched her come home with swollen feet and eyes that looked like they had been scrubbed with sandpaper. On the third night, I sat back down at the table. I did not send a long explanation. I did not beg. I just sent a kill shot. It is about a kid. The phone on the laminate counter did not just ring. It screamed. The caller ID showed a country code for Germany. +49. I picked it up on the first vibration. I did not say hello. I just waited for the voice on the other end to break. What kid? Ethan asked. His voice was gravel. It sounded like he had been screaming into a pillow for 3 days. He sounded defensive. He sounded like a man who knew he was standing on a landmine. I did not blink. I kept my voice flat, like I was reading a logistics report in a tent in Iraq. 17 weeks pregnant when she was kicked out. A rainy Wednesday night in October. Emergency room, preeclampsia, life or death. He is 14 months old now. His name is Micah. The line went dead quiet. All I could hear was the faint hiss of a long-distance connection and a jagged, broken hitch in his breathing. It was the sound of a world collapsing. My father told me she ran off, Ethan whispered. The words were weak. They were the words of a man who had been fed a diet of lies for 2 years. He told me she found some truck driver at a bar. He said she took off and did not want to be found. He took my phone, Alicia. He said he was protecting my future. He said she was a distraction. He lied, I said. I let the words hang in the air like smoke. He did not protect your future. He stole your son. He stood on that stage and called her a sinner while he held the keys to the gate he locked her out of. I am coming home, Ethan said. There was no hesitation. The golden boy was gone. In his place was a man with nothing left to lose. 3 weeks later, I was leaning against a concrete pillar at the DFW International Airport. The air smelled of jet fuel and expensive coffee. People were rushing past me, a sea of suits and tourists, but I stayed still. I saw him coming through the automatic glass doors of the International Arrivals Gate. He did not look like the man in the LinkedIn photo. He was thin. His face was hollowed out. He was dragging a single aluminum suitcase behind him. He looked like a soldier who had just crawled out of a trench after a long defeat. He looked like he was hunting for blood. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer a smile. I just jerked my chin toward the parking garage. Get in the truck, I said. We did not talk during the drive. The I-35 was a mess of brake lights and construction. Ethan stared out the window at the suburban sprawl of Dallas, his jaw locked tight. He looked like he was memorizing every mile of the ground his father had used to bury his life. When we pulled into the apartment complex, the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the parking lot. Josie was in the small cement courtyard out back. She was holding Micah. The boy was wearing a bright red t-shirt. He was trying to climb a low brick wall, his little legs kicking at the air. I stopped the truck. Ethan did not wait for me to kill the engine. He shoved the door open and stepped out onto the hot asphalt. He dropped the handle of his suitcase. The metal hit the ground with a loud, ringing crash. He took 2 steps toward them. His legs looked like they were made of water. He reached the edge of the courtyard and just stopped. He did not say a word. He just stared at the boy with the black curls. Micah stopped his climbing. He turned around, tilted his head, and looked at the stranger. He did not cry. He just blinked those big, dark eyes. "Hi," Micah chirped. It was a small, bright sound in the heavy silence. Ethan did not answer. He could not. He fell. Both of his knees hit the rough, gray concrete with a sickening thud. He did not care about the scrapes on his jeans. He did not care about the people watching from the balconies. He put his face in his hands, and he broke. His shoulders shook with a violence that made the air feel cold. Josie stood there, frozen. She looked at me, then back at him. She walked over, her steps slow and cautious. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the blue ink letter I had found in the drawer. She did not say anything. She just placed the crumpled pages into his shaking hand. I stood on the second-floor walkway, looking down at the 3 of them. I crossed my arms over my chest. I watched the man who had been lied to and the woman who had been silenced finally find a common language on a piece of dirty concrete. The team was finally together. The ammunition was locked in. All I had to do now was wait for the enemy to walk into the kill zone. I looked toward the steeple of Grace Fellowship in the distance. "Your move, Pastor," I whispered. The whispers started at the grocery store. Then they moved to the pharmacy. By the time Micah was pushing toward his 3rd birthday, the rumor mill at Grace Fellowship was churning like an old combine harvester in a dust storm. People in North Dallas have eyes. They are nosy. They saw the ink-black curls. They saw that Harmon jawline on a kid being pushed in a shopping cart by a girl who was supposed to be a disgraced woman. The perfect suburban image was cracking. And for Frank and Deborah, the image was everything. It was a Saturday morning. The Texas heat was already thick, smelling of scorched grass and pool chlorine. The doorbell rang with a persistent, annoying rhythm. I did not have to check the camera. I knew that rhythm. It was the sound of a mission being delivered. I opened the door and stood there. I did not move. I did not offer a greeting. Aunt Carol stood on the porch, clutching a plastic container of homemade chocolate chip cookies. She wore a floral blouse and a smile that looked like it had been stapled onto her face. Behind her, the street was quiet, but I could see Mrs. Higgins 2 houses down, pretend watering her roses while she watched us. "Alicia, honey," Carol said, her voice high and shaky. "I just thought I would drop these off. Your mother and father. They are under so much pressure, Alicia. People are talking. It is not right. They want a chance to make things right. They want to be a family again. Frank, he just does not know how to approach the pastor about all this." I did not reach for the cookies. I kept my hands at my sides, my shoulders squared like I was back on the parade ground. I looked her right in those watery, prying eyes. "Emma, tell him to say exactly what he said 3 years ago," I said. My voice was a low, flat rasp. "Tell him to tell the pastor that Josie is not his daughter. That was the only truth he ever managed to tell. Why change the script now?" Carol turned white. She opened her mouth to spout some scripture about forgiveness, but I did not give her the air. I stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door. The sound echoed through the hallway, a sharp, violent bang that felt like a gunshot. I walked into the kitchen. Ethan was sitting at the small table, his large hands working a screwdriver as he assembled a red tricycle for Micah. He looked up, his eyes hard and calculating. I just gave him a short, sharp nod. The enemy was starting to panic. The perimeter was being tested. 2 days later, the attack moved to the parking lot. I was loading a crate of water into the back of my Ford when I smelled it. That cloying, heavy scent of expensive roses. Deborah was standing by my rear bumper. She looked like she was dressed for a brunch at the country club, but her hands were white as she gripped a gift box wrapped in silver ribbon. "Alicia, stop this," she said. She was not whispering. She was loud. She wanted the neighbors in apartment 4B to hear her motherly concern. She was playing the role of the grieving, abandoned parent. This has gone on long enough. We need to get back to normal. You cannot keep that girl away from her family forever. It is cruel. It is unchristian. I turned around slowly. I did not lean against the truck. I stood straight, looking down at her. Normal? I asked. The word tasted like copper. Normal was you stripping her of her dignity while the rain was hitting the windows. Normal was you sitting in that pew while your boss called her a slut. I threw your normal in the trash 3 years ago, Deborah, right along with the pearl earrings you ripped off her ears. Deborah's face twisted. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she caught herself. She looked at the windows of the complex, her eyes darting. She was calculating the social cost of a public scene. She started to squeeze out a few practiced tears, her breath hitching. "We just want to see the boy," she sobbed. It was a hell of a performance. Before I could tell her to get off my property, the screen door to the apartment creaked open. Josie stepped out. She was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, but she looked like a queen standing on that concrete walkway. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She was just still. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. "This Sunday," Josie said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the humid afternoon air like a knife. "It is Micah's 3rd birthday. We are having a small party out back. If you want things to be normal so badly, Deborah, show up." Deborah froze. She stopped the fake sobbing and stood up straight, her eyes lighting up with a victory she had not earned. She thought she had found the weak link. She thought she had finally broken the girl she had discarded. She gave a quick, triumphant nod, tucked her hair behind her ear, and turned toward her Lexus without another word. I watched the car pull away. The silence that followed was heavy. I turned back to Josie. She was looking at the ground, her jaw set in a hard line. "You think they will bring Greg?" Josie asked. I reached into the pocket of my flight jacket and pulled out 3 thick, white envelopes. I had spent the morning writing the names in black ink. Precise, military. "I have already sent the pastor a personal invitation," I said, a cold smirk twitching at the corner of my mouth. It is time to clear the minefield. Sunday, 2 p.m. The Dallas heat was a physical weight, a thick, humid blanket that smelled of scorched Bermuda grass and cheap lighter fluid. I stood in the small backyard of the apartment complex, my back against a wooden post that was silvered with age and rot. I had set up a small nylon canopy to fight the sun. A few people were scattered around. Patrice, the military medic who had seen me through the worst of Iraq, stood by the portable grill. The sizzle of hot dogs and the acrid smoke of charcoal filled the air. But it did not feel like a celebration. It felt like a briefing before a raid. I looked up at the second-floor window. The blinds were drawn tight, but I knew Ethan was there. He was sitting in the shadows of the kitchen, his large hands probably gripping the edge of the laminate table. He was the ghost in the machine, the variable my parents did not know existed. I checked the wooden gate one last time. I had oiled the hinges so they would not squeak. I wanted to hear them coming. I wanted every second of their arrival to be etched into the pavement. At exactly 2:15, the sound arrived. It was the low, expensive hum of a luxury engine and the crunch of heavy tires grinding the driveway gravel into fine white dust. A black Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb, its chrome grille gleaming like a row of polished teeth. I did not move. I did not put down my water bottle. I just watched. Frank stepped out first. He was wearing a navy blue polo shirt, starched so stiff it looked like it was made of plastic. He adjusted his belt, pulling it over a stomach that had grown on a diet of church potlucks and a sense of unearned importance. He looked around the cramped parking lot with a faint, practiced sneer, his eyes dismissing the rusted sedans and the cracked asphalt as if they were a personal insult to his status. Deborah followed him. She was holding a glass casserole tray wrapped tightly in silver foil. She stepped onto the grass in her designer sandals, her gold bracelets clinking with every sharp, bird-like movement. She wore a smile that was not a smile. It was a mask of calculated grace. the kind she used when she was presiding over the women's ministry. She did not look like a mother coming to see her daughter. She looked like a landlord coming to collect a debt. They pushed through the gate with the posture of people who believed their presence was a gift from God. Deborah placed the tray on the plastic folding table next to the grill. "Josie, I brought the potato salad," Deborah called out, her voice pitching high and loud enough for Patrice and the neighbors to hear. It was a performance. She was marking her territory with cold starch and cheap mayonnaise. "I know how much you struggle to keep a proper kitchen in a place like this." Josie was sitting on a lawn chair, wiping a smear of dirt off Micah's face. She did not stand up. She did not run to them. She just gave a slow, measured nod that made Deborah's smile falter for a fraction of a second. Frank walked toward them, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He did not look at Josie's face. He looked at Micah. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. He held it out toward the 3-year-old, waving it slightly. "Here, boy," Frank said, his voice a low rumble of forced authority. "Go buy yourself a real toy. Something that does not come from a thrift store." Micah did not reach for the envelope. He did not care about the money inside. He looked at the man with the starched shirt and then scrambled backward, hiding his face behind Josie's leg. He did not recognize the man who shared his blood. He saw a stranger with a cold voice. Frank's face turned a muddy shade of red. He snatched his hand back, his fingers curling into a fist. "The boy needs to be taught how to respect his elders," he muttered, looking at Deborah for support. "This is what happens when you raise a child in a house without a father's hand." I took a slow sip of my water. I watched the sweat bead on Frank's forehead. I was counting the seconds. I was waiting for the final piece of the puzzle to walk through the gate. If you have ever stood in your own home and watched a relative act like they were doing you a favor while they were busy insulting everything you have built, hit that like button right now. We need to stand together against the people who use family as a weapon. Leave a comment below with the word mask if you have ever had to deal with someone who cared more about their image than your actual heart. And make sure to subscribe because you do not want to miss the moment the truth finally explodes. The gate creaked open again. The air seemed to grow even heavier. Pastor Greg Harmon walked in, followed by his wife Margaret. Greg was wearing a light gray linen shirt and a pair of expensive sunglasses. He had the easy, relaxed gait of a man who owned the town. He raised a hand in a wave, a politician's greeting that did not reach his eyes. Deborah rushed toward him, her floral skirt swishing as she performed her best, hallowed greeting. She acted like a servant welcoming a king. Frank stood taller, puffing out his chest, desperate for the pastor's approval. They were all standing there in a circle of lies, patting each other on the back, convinced they had won. They thought they had successfully swept the problem under the rug and that this party was the final act of their victory. I set my glass down on the stone table. The sound was sharp, like a gavel hitting a block. I looked over at Josie. She saw the signal. She shifted her weight, standing up slowly. "Thank you all for coming," Josie said, her voice finally finding its edge. "But we are missing one guest." I looked toward the kitchen door. The battle was officially beginning. Deborah's laugh was a high, thin sound that grated against the humid afternoon air like a rusty hinge. She was leaning over the potato salad, whispering church gossip to Margaret Harmon, as if they were old war buddies sharing a secret. She looked comfortable. She looked like she had already won the war. Frank stood nearby, his chest puffed out under his starched polo shirt, holding a cold lemonade like it was a scepter of his suburban kingdom. They were performing. They were showing the public that the Goodwins were a family of grace and forgiveness. The sliding glass door behind them did not just open. It shrieked against the metal track, a sharp, violent sound that cut through Deborah's laughter like a knife through silk. Ethan Harmon stepped out onto the concrete patio. He was not wearing a suit. He was not the polished golden boy they remembered. He was wearing faded jeans and a plain black t-shirt that showed the lean muscle of a man who had been working for every cent he owned. His eyes were not on the crowd. They were locked on the small boy playing in the grass. The backyard went dead quiet. The only sound was the low hum of a neighbor's lawnmower 2 streets over. Frank's face did not just go pale, it went gray, the color of wet sidewalk. Greg Harmon froze, his hand shaking so hard that ice cubes rattled against the glass of his drink. Micah dropped his plastic truck into the dirt. He looked up, his dark curls damp with sweat. He did not look at Frank. He did not look at the pastor. He scrambled up from the grass, his little legs churning, and let out a high, joyous scream that shattered the silence. "Daddy! Daddy!" Ethan dropped to one knee on the rough concrete. He did not care about his jeans. He did not care about the dirt. He caught the boy in his arms, pulling him into a grip so tight it looked like he was afraid the kid might evaporate into the Texas heat. He buried his face in Micah's neck, his shoulders heaving once, twice, before he regained his military-grade composure. The silence that followed was heavy. It was a suffocating, physical weight. Frank's throat worked, his Adam's apple bobbing behind his tight collar. He tried to find his voice, but it came out in a dry, pathetic stutter. Is this Ethan's? Why was I not told? Why did no one say a word about this? Deborah dropped the serving spoon. It hit the laminate table with a hollow clack, splattering potato salad across the white tablecloth. Her eyes were darting between Ethan and the neighbors, her brain already calculating the massive damage to her social standing. "How could you hide this?" she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. "We are your parents. We have a right to know our own blood." I stepped down from the porch, my boots thudding rhythmically on the grass. I stood right between them and the man holding my nephew. I kept my back straight, my hands loose at my sides. "Josie tried to tell you," I said. My voice was a low, dangerous rasp that carried to every corner of the yard. 3 years ago, sitting at your dining room table, she tried to give you the truth. But you didn't want the truth, Frank. You wanted an exit strategy. You told her she was not your daughter before she could even finish the sentence. Frank's face twisted into a mask of desperate authority. He pointed a finger at the sliding door, his hand shaking. "This is family business. We are going inside, right now. We will sit down and discuss this like adults." "No," I said. I did not move. I did not blink. 3 years ago, you made a choice. You traded your daughter for a seat on the church board. You traded her for a clean reputation and a laser-trimmed lawn. You don't get to call for a family meeting when the evidence of your betrayal is standing right in front of you. Deborah saw the neighbors staring. She saw Dr. Patrice watching her with a look of pure disgust. She pivoted, reaching for the only weapon she had left, her victimhood. She clutched her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she started a practiced sob. "How can you do this to us, shaming us in our own community? I am so humiliated I cannot even show my face at the church. You are destroying us." Josie stepped forward. She was still holding the blue-inked letter I had found in the drawer. She did not look like the girl who had been kicked out in the rain. She looked like a woman who had walked through fire and come out cold as steel. She stood right in front of her mother, her face inches from Deborah's. "You are humiliated?" Josie asked. Her voice was quiet, but it had the edge of a razor. I laid on a hospital bed alone at 3 in the morning, with my blood pressure high enough to kill me. I looked at my phone for an hour, watching the read receipt on the message I sent you. I waited for a mother who never came. Micah was 10 minutes old before I knew if he was even breathing. "And you are the one who is humiliated?" Deborah's fake sobbing stopped instantly. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The motherly mask had cracked, and underneath was nothing but a hollow, selfish pride. Greg Harmon saw the ship sinking. He turned toward the gate, his movements quick and frantic. He grabbed Margaret's arm, his fingers digging into her sleeve. "We are leaving," he muttered, his voice a sharp hiss. "This is a circus. This is not the place for people of our standing." He tried to push past me. I moved faster. I blocked the gate with my shoulder, my eyes locked onto his. I pulled the 3-page letter from my pocket and held it up. "Where are you going, Greg?" I asked. I did not let him look away. "You stood on that pulpit and called my sister a moral rot. You told your congregation that sin must be brought to the light. Well, here is the light." I shook the paper in his face. "You intercepted your son's mail. You deleted his messages. You told Ethan that Josie was a barfly just so you could keep your precious seat at Grace Fellowship. You sold out your own grandson to protect a title that is not worth the paper it is printed on. Greg's face did not just fall, it shattered. He looked at the letter, then at the crowd, then at the son he had lied to for 3 years. The mask was gone. The pastor was dead. There was only a small, terrified man standing in the dirt. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a sentence. The silence that followed Greg Harmon's exposure was not a peaceful one. It was the kind of silence you find in a graveyard right before a storm. Heavy, thick, and smelling of ozone. Margaret Harmon stood as still as a statue, her face stripped of every drop of color. She looked at her husband. She looked at the man she had shared a bed with for 30 years, the man who had just been revealed as a calculated liar and a traitor to his own blood. Greg was not looking at her. He was looking at the dirt, his expensive linen shirt soaked through with a cold, greasy sweat. He looked small. He looked like a cornered rat realizing the walls were closing in. Margaret did not scream. She did not throw a glass. She just turned her back on him. It was a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a final sentence. She walked 3 steps across the yellowed grass of the courtyard until she reached Ethan and Josie. She did not look at them. She looked at Micah. She dropped one knee onto the rough lawn, her floral skirt bunching up in the dirt. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady as she looked into the boy's dark eyes. "Hi, little one," she whispered. Her voice broke on the last word, a jagged sound that tore through the quiet. "I am your grandmother. I am so sorry it took me so long to find you." Greg Harmon stood there, 30 feet away, absolutely alone. His wife had crossed the line. His son was holding a child he did not even know existed. His kingdom at Grace Fellowship was a pile of ash in the Texas heat. He did not try to apologize. He did not try to pray. A coward like that only knows how to run when the lights come on. He turned his back, his head tucked into his shoulders, and pushed through the wooden gate without a word. The sound of his Lexus engine starting up and roaring away was the only eulogy his reputation was going to get. But Frank and Deborah were still there. They stood in the center of the yard, frozen like 2 people who had just realized they were standing in the middle of a minefield after the first one had already gone off. They were no longer the pillars of the community. They were just 2 old, bitter people whose lives had run out of road. Deborah realized her social status was bleeding out on the pavement. She tried to pivot. She reached out both of her hands toward Micah, her gold bracelets clinking with a desperate, frantic rhythm. Her face was twisted into a mask of pathetic longing, her red manicured fingers trembling as she reached for the boy's sleeve. "Just let me hold him once," she begged, her voice a shrill, desperate whine. "Just a minute. I am his grandmother, Josie. You cannot do this to me. Think of the family name." Micah did not even look at her. He did not know this woman with the rose-scented perfume and the cold eyes. He buried his face in Ethan's neck and gripped his father's black t-shirt with both of his small hands. He let out a sharp, jagged whimper and shook his head, a silent and absolute rejection that hit Deborah harder than any slap ever could. The verdict was in. The boy did not want her. The child she had tried to erase from the family tree had just erased her. Frank's authority had completely evaporated. He looked like an old suit that had been left out in the rain, limp, wrinkled, and useless. He grabbed Deborah by the elbow, his grip violent and clumsy. He did not look at me. He did not look at the daughter he had disowned. "Come on, Deborah," Frank muttered. His voice was a hollow rasp, stripped of the booming power he used at the church board meetings. "We are leaving." They walked toward the gate, their steps heavy and uncoordinated. They looked like refugees fleeing a city they had burned down themselves. No one said a word. No one offered a handshake. No one said goodbye. I stood by the porch and watched them go. I watched the black Lexus back out of the driveway, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air long after they disappeared around the corner of the block. I looked down at the plastic folding table. Deborah's tray of potato salad was still sitting there. The silver foil was peeled back, exposing a mass of congealed, yellowish starch. It was cold. It was unappealing. It was a perfect monument to the kind of love they had offered us. Something cheap, mass-produced, and completely devoid of actual soul. The tension in the yard started to dissipate like smoke in a high wind. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest since that rainy Wednesday night 3 years ago finally lifted. I felt a breath leave my lungs that I did not even know I was holding. Dr. Patrice walked over and squeezed my shoulder. She did not say anything. She did not have to. Ethan was still holding Micah, his eyes closed as he listened to the boy's heartbeat. Josie was standing next to them, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. For the first time, she did not look like a victim. She looked like a woman who had finally reclaimed her own name. I walked over to the wooden gate. I grabbed the heavy latch, the cold metal feeling solid and honest in my hand. I swung the gate shut and slid the bolt home. Click. The sound was sharp and final. It was the sound of a perimeter being secured. It was the sound of the enemy being locked out of the command post forever. The mission was over. The traitors were gone. We were still standing. I looked at the three of them, the sister I had saved, the man who had returned, and the boy who had started it all. I did not need a church, and I did not need a family name. I had a fortress. Eat, I said, my voice raspy but clear. The food is getting cold. 4 months had passed since the Sunday afternoon when the world in North Dallas finally stopped pretending. The dust had settled, but the landscape was unrecognizable. Greg Harmon was gone. The board at Grace Fellowship had not called it a firing. They had termed it an indefinite leave for personal restoration. It was the corporate church equivalent of being dumped in a ditch. He was a non-entity now, a ghost haunting a suburban house that felt more like a tomb. Deborah had been purged from the ministries. She did not shop at the local Kroger anymore. I had seen her once, 3 towns over, looking at a carton of eggs with eyes that were hollow and terrified. She looked like she was waiting for someone to scream at her. Frank was the worst of them. He was a coward who used the mail to beg for a scrap of the life he had burned down. Every 2 weeks, a plain white envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just Frank's shaky, uneven handwriting. Inside, there was always a card. Thinking of you, they said. Or, family is forever. He never mentioned the night he pushed his daughter into a thunderstorm. He never mentioned the 3 years he spent calling his grandson a stain. He just wanted a way back into the light without having to admit he had been the darkness. I stood in the hallway of the apartment, the latest envelope in my hand. I did not open it. I walked to the corner where the heavy-duty paper shredder sat. I fed the envelope into the slot. The machine let out a hungry mechanical growl as the metal teeth tore the paper into thousands of thin, white strips. I watched it until the bin was full of Frank's useless and pathetic regret. Sunday morning brought a different kind of air. It was October, and the Texas heat had finally broken. I walked into the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my boots. I reached for a canister of coffee on top of the fridge, and my knuckles hit that porcelain pot Aunt Carol had left behind. It was a hideous thing, stiff, floury, and with a cracked handle. It sat there like a monument to the life Deborah wanted Josie to live. I took it down. It was cold and heavy. I did not hesitate. I held it over the iron trash can and let it drop. The sound was a sharp, jagged explosion that echoed off the tile walls. Porcelain turned to dust and shards. It did not make me feel better, but it made the room feel lighter. Chipped junk has no place in this fortress. I did not look back. Out in the living room, the sun was cutting through the blinds in long, sharp blades of gold. Josie was sitting on the floor, surrounded by heavy textbooks. She was not a victim anymore. She was a student. She had fought her way into the nursing program at the community college, her jaw set in that same hard line I saw in the mirror every morning. She did not ask for money. She did not ask for help. She just worked. Across from her, Ethan was lying on the rug with Micah. The boy was 3 now, his ink-black curls bouncing as he tried to build a skyscraper out of plastic blocks. Ethan did not look like the man who had crawled out of a trench in Germany anymore. He looked like a man who had finally found the ground he was supposed to stand on. He was patient. The door opened and Margaret Harmon walked in. She was carrying a bag of fresh apples and a gallon of milk. She had moved out of Greg's house 3 months ago. She did not bring a Bible, and she did not bring a lecture. She just sat down on the rug and started helping Micah with his tower. There was no pretense here, no starched shirts, no fake smiles for the congregation. Just the smell of roasted coffee and the sound of a kid laughing. I leaned against the doorframe, my mug of coffee warm against my palm. I looked at the fridge. Stuck there with a magnet was Micah's latest drawing. It was 5 stick figures in bright wax crayon. Josie was in blue, Ethan in black, Micah in green, Margaret in yellow. There was no Frank, no Deborah, no Greg. They were all gone from his heart. But on the far edge of the paper, Micah had drawn a figure in dark red. It was the largest one. It stood with its arms out, and behind its shoulders, he had drawn a thick, jagged line that looked exactly like a cape. The figure was the guard, the one who stood at the gate so the others could sleep. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness was exactly right. I watched my sister laugh as Micah knocked over the block tower. I did not need a medal from the Pentagon. I did not need a title. I looked at that red-caped stick figure and knew exactly what my mission was. The mission was not just about the fight. It was about what was left standing when the smoke cleared. It was about the peace we built on the ruins of their lies. It was finally over. If you have ever stood in the middle of a storm and realized that the only people who matter are the ones holding the umbrella for you, then this story is for you. We are not defined by the blood in our veins, but by the promises we keep when things get ugly. If you are standing your ground against the lies in your own life, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment with the word warrior, so I know you are in the fight with us. And make sure to subscribe to the channel, because the truth is a weapon and we are just getting started. I will see you in the next one.